Test the claim.
Finish.
No. The mics are still hot, so carry on.
There's a flaw in the theory, specifically because I was recently investigating Exodus, and I was like, what interests me about Exodus is the fact that cats aren't mentioned.
Okay, go on.
Because you'd expect...
You got my attention.
Given the reverence of cats in Egypt,
Yeah.
you'd expect them to have some sort of...
So do you think it's like intentionally silent on the topic?
Yeah, I was like, you would not like if you wanted to
Like,
hurt
there's
Egypt.
quite a lot of cat worship. Oh, I see.
If you wanted to hurt Egypt,
like, out of respect, you mean?
Yeah. If you wanted to like really do Egypt dirty, you'd hurt their cats.
Right.
Like, that was historic. That was like.
But that was taboo in a way.
Yeah, for Egypt, if you hurt a cat, that was a death sentence.
Right.
And you defend the gods, and you put the entire country at risk of the wrath of a cat god who would go around killing everyone. So they were very protective of their cats. And specifically, a lot of the plagues with like the locusts and the gnats and like stuff, it was like that seemed to.
But did they worship gnats?
No. But it's just like obviously the gnats would destroy their crops, but the cats would eat the gnats.
Right.
So it was just like God was also destroying Egypt, but helping out the cats. And it's just like it's very strange. This relationship with domestic cats that aren't really mentioned in the entire Bible is very strange. But it's like that's the only flaw in the theory of like God has something against the gods because like the cats were fine.
Right.
But like otherwise, I'm a believer of that theory. It's but obviously the original point you were making that at that point in time it was more of a competition against God versus the other gods, and God just won out.
Yeah, I don't want to. I'm not just pulling that out of nowhere. Hold on, what have I got here?
And a lot
that's in here. Ancient Israelite religion.
Yeah. But so a lot of after that, towards probably the vast majority, if not all of the Old Testament, is trying to find ways to win the loyalty of the Israelite people against the competing gods of the other Canaanite tribes.
Well, that's the thing. Why do they keep deviating? Why do they keep turning their backs on God? One reason is because there's loads of other options. There were loads of other regional options, and listen, if one preacher promises some sort of positive, like some benefit from worshipping their God, then there's inevitably going to be people who will listen.
Particularly when Israel was failing, like when you have like Assyria destroying everything, and you're like, well, they're doing fine.
Quite a fickle religious milieu. So that's some of my views on the transmission of Iranian religious ideas into the Abrahamic tradition. But don't just take my word for it. There are scholars like Sebastian Cote-Pabon wrote a paper called Iranian Themes in Jewish Eschatology. And then you have like the famous Iranologist Mary Boyce, who's like adamant that those ideas have been transmitted. Robert Price, like I mentioned earlier as well.
So, Cyrus, because the connection that Iran has with the Bible and the Jewish tradition is from Cyrus the Great, because he freed the Jews from their captivity and he allowed them to go back to Judea and build their temple. God called him a Messiah in that sense that he's going to save his children from bondage and bring them back.
Yeah.
Now, not only that, but when Jesus is born, there are magi that come from Iran. Okay, now Daniel himself was employed in the court of the Persian king, right? So this connection that now what they're saying is, well, we had this idea. Who had what idea and who took from whom is not something that in retrospect we can just go back and say this was a Zoroastrian idea. They had the real monotheists, and then the Jews took that monotheism from them. That's the claim, right? Yeah. So if that's the claim, then you got okay. So it depends on if you have a very serious crime of murder, to convict you, you have to have a very serious evidence, right? If you are just convicted of like some trespassing, you don't need the same degree of evidence, right? But if you make a claim that big, you gotta come up with a very
With what?
that big of a claim that Judaism took monotheism from Zoroastrianism, then you gotta back it up with something that strong that can say, yeah, well, that you cannot deny, it's undeniable. And that's my point. Because in the Bible, the Persians have a very special relationship with the God of Israel, is what I would say.
That's not borne out even in the Jewish text, because even in in Isaiah 45, Yahweh says, "I've raised you up in righteousness to Cyrus, though you have not known me, or you do not know me." So the relationship appears only in one direction in that particular sense.
However, why would Cyrus free the Jews and let them go? Let me ask you that.
So it appears that
Now you got to address, since you've made a very strong point, saying it's one way. Because God is saying this about Cyrus. Now my counterpoint is, if that's the case, then why did Cyrus free them and let them go? Answer that, please.
So I think it was Cyrus's policy to free the slaves. However, the slaves in Babylon were not exclusively Jewish. That's the first thing.
Can you back that up?
Okay, so for example, one piece of evidence that would support that is, for example, one of the most famous Persian artifacts that's ever been discovered, which was discovered in the ruins of Babylon, the Cyrus cylinder. So on this cylinder, in the cuneiform inscription, I think in ancient Babylonian, Akkadian, and maybe one other language, there is a decree that all captives are to be repatriated to their homelands. But it never speaks specifically about any one group of people.
That may be the case. However, my question is why? Why would he do that? Please answer that question. I'm fine with that evidence, and I've seen that cylinder as well. I'm familiar with that, and that might be the case. There is an inscription there. My question is, why would a prince, or a king rather, let go of his slaves? Because that's money. It's money.
Yeah.
Why did he do that? Please answer that.
So, do you accept, first of all, that Cyrus was probably a Zoroastrian?
It could be, yes.
So, one of the principles of Zoroastrianism are built upon doing the right thing. Doing the right thing for the sake of doing it.
Are you saying before Cyrus there were no Zoroastrian kings at all?
No, yes, there were.
Why wouldn't they free the slaves?
Well, I wouldn't expect everybody to come to the same conclusion per se, but also there had to be a reason why Cyrus is held in such regard, and it just happens to be that he was prepared to do something maybe that nobody else before him was prepared to do.
That's a weak argument, okay? Because my argument is it's stated in the Bible that he will free the slaves, and God has chosen him even though he doesn't know him. That's God's prerogative if he wants to choose, because who's going to free the Jews now that they're in slavery? There is no Jewish king who's going to come and save them. God uses Cyrus and does. Now, your counter-argument is because Cyrus is doing it out of his goodwill. But I'm saying that, wait a minute, that's mentioned in the Bible that he will do so.
But your understanding is based on the assumption that what's written about Cyrus in the Old Testament is a prophecy. I don't believe that it's a prophecy. I believe it was written contemporary to what was happening, or even afterwards.
And you can back that up.
So I have read scholarly research that places that part of Isaiah where it talks about Cyrus as having been written at a later time. So are you familiar with the thesis of Deutero Isaiah?
The thesis of?
Deutero Isaiah or second Isaiah?
Second Isaiah.
Yeah.
No, tell me about it.
Okay, so the hypothesis is that primarily based on linguistic style, techniques, like certain phraseology that's used, that Isaiah 40 to 55 was authored by someone other than 1 to 39. And that the indication is that it's significantly later than the first part of Isaiah.
Significantly could mean 1,000 years or could mean a decade. Can you give me a time frame of significantly? What do you mean by that?
So from what I've read, no one has given us like a firm
time frame. I'm not talking about exact.
So I'm saying either contemporary to the events, i.e. contemporary to the arrival of the Persians in Babylon, so 539 BC, and potentially, let's say, 100 years later.
100 years later.
Yeah, like during the time of the subsequent Persian kings.
I see. Okay. So you're saying within 100 years of this event, this was inserted into the text.
Yeah.
And before that, there is a text that it probably exists somewhere that did not include the 42 whatever chapter you're talking about.
Yeah, so like one idea that's put forward is that portion of the book of Isaiah was written not necessarily by one person, but by an Isaiah school of thought, and that they created this story to attach to the end of. Sorry, yeah.
So you're saying that somebody in that time period thought about this and said, wait a minute, he's freeing the slaves. Why don't I put something in here in the book of Isaiah that will match these? And so, because what you're saying now, this is something that somebody has went back and edited the book.
Yeah.
But there's two problems here. First of all, there is the Dead Sea Scrolls, where we found the full book of Isaiah, complete book,
Yeah.
as it was written.
Yeah.
Now, that can be dated and stuff, and I believe it has. Now, I wonder if what you've just stated has any bearing on that or not. We can examine that. But the second problem is, what would be the motivation for putting, how many chapters you said? 40 to 50 something?
15 chapters.
15 chapters. What would be the motivation? Because there's not just, this is just a few verses that mention this part.
Yeah.
What would be the motivation to put the rest of the book? Because I haven't read that. I'm not familiar with what's between 40 and the 53 or 55.
Yeah.
That's not in the 1 to 39.
Yeah.
And why is it? Because I'm not familiar with that. So maybe I need to educate myself. Tell me about it, what you think, what it is, what the theory is behind it.
So first of all, I think it's important for me to be like intellectually honest here and say that we're now moving into speculation. The part I mentioned about the linguistic analysis, that's the work of scholars, and they're doing that in a much more scientific way. What was the first part of the question you asked?
There's two parts.
Yeah.
One is that there's Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yes.
That are an exact copy of the Isaiah that we have now.
Yeah.
However, the other point is that the motivation, what would motivate somebody
Right.
in the contemporary time or after, was there a significant event, or was it just based on this one fact that there was, because this one fact is mentioned in a few verses.
I got you. So the Dead Sea Scrolls are part of the corpus of literature that was used to reach this conclusion that I mentioned about the Deutero Isaiah hypothesis.
I would need more information about how that was.
Yeah, well, I'll give you the names of some of the. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I'll give you some of the names of the scholars. The motivation seems pretty clear to me, actually. So first of all, let me give you a little bit of background about the Persian method of spreading their own religious ideas. So they were considered to be quite tolerant, religiously quite tolerant. So for example, when Cyrus entered Babylon, despite having been described as coming on behalf of Yahweh, he went and prostrated at the temple of Marduk. Cyrus.
Cyrus?
Yeah. So the local god is Marduk.
Marduk. Okay.
Yeah.
And why would he do that? Because that would be paganism, right? Was Marduk a pagan?
It would be paganism in the sense, like if we go by the definition of paganism simply being practicing a religion or religious tradition outside of the Abrahamic.
Not just that, it just means, yeah, right, okay. So
Because if Cyrus worshipped Ahura Mazda, he would also be considered a pagan.
No, Ahura Mazda, that's something that I have not made any specific statement on. Ahura Mazda could be the biblical God. Could
I
he
will
not
explain
be?
why it definitely isn't.
No, he isn't.
No.
Okay.
Ahura Mazda is
He's
the
the god
god of Zoroastrianism.
Okay, then you can please address that issue because that will clear up
Yeah.
a lot of what we are discussing here. Because if I don't know the definition of your Ahura Mazda,
Yeah.
then let's clear that up.
Okay. So I addressed the Dead Sea Scrolls part. The Dead Sea Scrolls were part of the corpus of literature used for the linguistic
but you
analysis.
didn't complete that because you said you'll give me the names of the people.
Yes, I will give
who
you the
has-
names.
And we'll see.
When you come in again, I'll get my phone out and
We'll
check.
talk about that next time.
Okay,
So
sure.
can you go to Ahura Mazda, please?
Well, first I want to give like reasons why the Jewish texts would have been changed to include this narrative. You said what was the motivation?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I began to describe the Persian system for spreading their religious ideas. Because despite being very tolerant of other religions, where they encountered religions that were not in keeping with the main principles of their beliefs, they would either reform them or they would slowly phase them out, which is why the Temple of Marduk doesn't exist anymore. Now, had it not been for the arrival of the Persians and for their benevolence towards the Jews, for example, we wouldn't have a Judaism anymore, frankly. However, I'm talking about the preservation of the people, I'm talking about the repatriation to their homeland, the rebuilding of their temple, and so on. Now,
But
why?
you didn't give me the motivation of the kings.
So why would the Jews write into their scripture about a man who was outside of their people, outside of their religious tradition, in the most elevated terms, to call him God's anointed? Why would they do that?
Because he was freeing the people of God,
Or to ingratiate themselves to him.
ingratiate themselves. to him.
So if you help us, if you free us, we will be the vehicle to spread your ideas. I'm not saying all the Jewish people said this.
Now we're getting into conspiracy theory.
Well, we're speculating.
Ancient conspiracy
We're
theory.
speculating.
Just to be fair, it's impossible. But also, you're thinking about it scientifically. You have to be careful when you're asking for evidence on a historical figure's motivations, especially as someone as old.
We don't
as
even know if
Cyrus.
his own advisors
Unless
knew his
you're actually
intentions.
there to ask him, you're not going to.
Yeah, I'm just speculating.
Speculating.
I'm just saying, why would a reasonable person do such a
No,
thing?
because he's speculating. Because here's the thing: this is all based on speculation. Because this person, hold on, because he's just saying that there is research that shows that this was put into this based on the current events at that time.
Yeah.
It wasn't there before. That's a huge claim.
Yeah, what I mean is, it's like you have to obviously from the point of view of like.
That's the scholarly consensus. And I'll tell you
Now he's
why.
making another claim.
I'll tell you why. In academia,